It is 12:41 a.m. on a weirdly warm late October night here in New York City, and I can't sleep. Welcome to Short Stories for Long Nights. I'm Jason. So tonight, we are going to jump into a story by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft. You knew it was just a matter of time till we got there. A complicated guy. He was born in 1890 and died in 1937. Born to a fairly affluent family in provincial New England, and by all accounts lived there fairly happily until his father was institutionalized. His family's fortunes kind of began to decline after that, and he lived with his mother, who years later was herself committed to an institution. Mr. Lovecraft was never particularly successful in his own time as a writer or an editor. He did publish in a lot of pulp magazines, weird stories and that sort of thing, but never really achieving any major level of success or fame. And it wasn't until the 1970s that he was sort of rediscovered, and people started making movies and writing about his work. In his younger years, he was definitely what we would call a very conservative guy. He was very concerned with what he saw as the decline of Western civilization. He blamed this decline largely on immigrants. He was very concerned about the degradation of the English language. He was concerned about slang, which again he saw as a direct result of people from other countries coming here and corrupting the language and the culture. And he was known throughout his life to make a number of xenophobic statements, and critics also saw those themes in his work. In his later years, he became a bit more liberal. He was a declared socialist and a big supporter of American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's more liberal economic and social programs designed to help the working man. He didn't think Roosevelt actually went far enough, and he was a self-proclaimed anti-fascist. So I think he had some progression in his views, although I didn't see anything ever saying that he actively tried to distance himself from his xenophobic and racist statements. So yeah, as I said, in the 70s, people began to sort of rediscover him and introduce him back into the pop culture. And at that point, I mean, your average moviegoer or reader might not know of him, but the people who were making the movies and doing the writing were aware of him and were introducing the public at large to Lovecraft's work simply by referencing it or taking it as inspiration. In 2001, someone made a film version of the story we're reading tonight, Dagon. There was a film called In the Mouth of Madness, which was influenced by Lovecraft's novel At the Mountain of Madness, and that film was by the great John Carpenter. In 1985, there was a film I remember very clearly because I just couldn't even bring myself to watch it, called Reanimator. Some of you Gen Xers may remember that one, based on a story of his by the same name. The film itself was kind of tongue-in-cheek, I think, but it freaked me out, and I couldn't watch it then, and I don't know that I've seen it to this day. But yeah, that's another one of his stories that was turned into a film. Another interesting thing that he did was to set a lot of his stories, since he was from New England, in a fictional New England town by the name of Arkham. Couple things about that. There is another writer of horror from that part of the country who has a tendency to set his stories in small fictional New England towns. Of course, I'm talking about Stephen King. I don't know for a fact that he borrowed that convention from Lovecraft, but it seems likely. And then, of course, Arkham shows up in the DC universe and Batman as the name of the asylum that the Joker's in. And I mean, that just looms so large in the DC world, of course, in Batman, and just in the popular culture of the day up until just a few weeks ago with the release of that fabulous Joker 2 movie that everyone loves so well. So yeah, he shows up everywhere. Finally, the last thing I want to mention that Lovecraft invented that people borrow from is the Necronomicon. It's a fictional grimoire, a magical book that is bound in human flesh and contains all sorts of forbidden knowledge and spells, chiefly among them a spell to bring people back from the dead. Again, it's all over the place. It showed up in a number of other books and in comics, I think in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. However, to me, most importantly, the Necronomicon is central to the plot of the Evil Dead franchise. And that's resulted in, I think, 5 films, including one just in 2023, and of course, the short-lived but great series Ash vs. the Evil Dead. So if nothing else, Mr. Lovecraft is indirectly responsible for the career of Bruce Campbell, and for that I will be forever grateful. Also, he talks about an artist by the name of Doré. This is a reference to Gustave Doré, who was known for doing lithographs and prints and comics that were sort of fantastic and a little bit on the grotesque, kind of nightmarish images, and we will link some of Gustave Doré's work in the show notes here. All right. So we are going very simple tonight, just vodka on the rocks, because I'm too lazy to do much of anything else. There we go. And I invite you to pour yourself your favorite beverage, or simply sit back and enjoy Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners. So liberal indeed was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and the stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awaked, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded, some distance away, though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery. I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less describable things, which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions which, for innumerable millions of years, had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might, nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking, or brooding, in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness, and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made myself a pack containing food and water preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still traveled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first spied it. By the fourth evening I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I now saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes in the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself, but I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near its zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping at my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphs unknown to me, and unlike anything I had seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did the most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Dore. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer, they were damnably human in general outline, despite the webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but a little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment I decided that they were merely imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe, some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown man or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing, whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters, vast, Polyphemus-like, and loathsome. It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and the cliff, of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know I heard peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of an American ship which had picked up my boat mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist, and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon the fish god, but soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug is given only transient surcease and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now, I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in that open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of the day when they may rise above the billows and drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind, of a day when the land shall sink, and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst the universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window! The end. Okay, Lovecraft. Wow. I find those kind of endings, those sort of like weird, ambiguous endings, really creepy. I don't know, like the ending of Blair Witch. If you saw that, it kind of has this weird, quasi-ambiguous note, which was so much freakier to me than a definite ending. Or like I think of that moment in The Shining in the movie, when the hotel's going crazy and Shelley Duvall looks down the hallway in a room and there's a guy laying on the bed and he kind of sits up and there's a guy kneeling in front of him in like a dog bear costume and they both just kind of look at her and there's like no explanation. That freaked me out so bad. And then when you read the book, you find there's a whole backstory to them, whatever. It's interesting, but not knowing I find much, much creepier. And so for me, this whole thing paid off in like those last two paragraphs. And I don't know. I kind of got the sense that he passed out in the boat and the rest is just, a fever dream. And he was recovered in the boat. I don't think he ever actually set foot in all that nastiness or saw anything. And what he's experiencing in the room is a hallucination. That's my take on it. I don't know. What do you think? Am I onto something? Am I talking nonsense? Do me a favor. Leave a comment on the Facebook page or wherever you're listening to your podcast that allows you to leave comments. As you do, be cool, be kind. Don't be a lump of unpleasantness, as Miss Venable would say. Although none of you are. You guys are great. Maybe as we gain more listeners, it might get worse, but the comments we've gotten have been really fantastic. So thank you for that. If you have a minute, please do give us a 5-star rating if you've enjoyed the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. It really does kind of elevate the podcast and help us get the word out. All right, my friend, thanks again for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Of course, as always, I want to thank Mr. Lovecraft for his excellent work. We want to thank Took the Band for their music. We want to thank Allison for her artwork. Links provided. Please do yourself a favor and check out some of their amazing stuff. Short Stories for Long Nights comes to you from my kitchen on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We are available on iHeart, Spotify, all the usual suspects. Originally I had kind of thought of doing authors across all these different genres, but I've just been having so much fun with this sci-fi fantasy stuff. I hope you have been too. There's so many great stories. I don't know, man. I think we're going to stick with this for a little bit. You may click on someday and I'll be like, hey, we're going to read Solzhenitsyn. But for now, I think we're going to hang out here. It's just fun. But the thing is, I had so much fun. I'm kind of feeling up now. Damn it. I'm not sleepy anymore. So, I'm going to refresh my cocktail, catch a rerun of Barnaby Jones on MeTV, and then I'm going to try to get some sleep.